Liam Foster adjusted the stiff collar of his freshly pressed uniform, his fingers trembling as he rode the elevator to the top floor of the Blackwell Tower. The numbers on the digital display ticked upward, each chime reminding him that he was about to step into a world completely foreign to him, a world of unimaginable wealth, power, and influence. At just 25, Liam was still new to the profession, having recently earned his nursing degree. His hands were skilled, his knowledge fresh, but his confidence wavered as he approached the most important assignment of his life. He had been hired to care for James Blackwell, one of the richest men in the country, a billionaire who, for the past 3 months, had been trapped in a deep, irreversible coma. The job paid well, almost too well. That alone made Liam uneasy. But he didn't have the luxury of turning it down. His mother, a woman who had raised him single-handedly, was lying in a small hospital bed across town, battling an aggressive form of cancer. Her treatment was expensive, and despite working overtime at the local hospital, Liam knew he would never be able to afford the care she needed on his own. This job, this one opportunity, was his only chance. "You can do this," Liam whispered to himself, gripping the handle of his rolling medical bag as the elevator glided to a stop. The doors slid open, revealing an opulent penthouse that seemed more like a museum than a home. The marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, and the scent of fresh-cut roses mingled with the faint aroma of expensive leather. Persian rugs, antique furniture, and oil paintings, each likely worth more than Liam would earn in a lifetime, decorated the vast open space. For a moment, he hesitated. "What am I doing here?" He felt out of place, as if he had accidentally wandered into a world where he didn't belong. But then, he thought of his mother, of her fragile frame, her soft smile despite the pain, and his resolve hardened. Before he could knock, the large mahogany door swung open, revealing a tall woman with sharp blue eyes and an air of impatience. "Ivy Blackwell. You must be the new nurse," she said, giving him a once-over, her tone carrying the weight of both skepticism and authority. "Yes, ma'am," Liam said, quickly offering his hand. "Liam Foster. I'm here to take care of Mr. Blackwell." Ivy ignored his handshake, turning on her heels and motioning for him to follow her down the long corridor. As they walked, Liam stole glances at his surroundings: modern sculptures, bookshelves filled with first-edition classics, and framed newspaper articles documenting James Blackwell's rise from a young entrepreneur to a billionaire tycoon. The silence in the penthouse was unnerving. It wasn't the comfortable hush of a home filled with love. It was the kind of silence that made every footstep feel like an intrusion. Ivy stopped abruptly, causing Liam to almost collide into her. She turned, her gaze piercing. "Before you step into my father's room, you need to understand something," she said, her voice low but firm. "This job requires absolute discretion. Whatever you see, whatever you hear, it stays in this apartment. Do you understand me?" Liam swallowed hard. He had expected strict rules, but there was something in her tone, something bordering on fear, that unsettled him. "Yes, ma'am," he said, forcing his voice to sound steady. Ivy narrowed her eyes, as if trying to gauge whether or not she could trust him. "Good. Because if you make a single mistake, if you give us any false hope, if you step out of line, you'll be fired on the spot." Liam nodded, his throat dry. He couldn't afford to lose this job. His mother's life depended on it. Ivy finally turned and opened the heavy wooden doors, revealing a room unlike anything Liam had ever seen. Inside, the space resembled a private hospital rather than a bedroom. State-of-the-art medical equipment lined the walls, monitors displaying vital signs, first stands, a ventilator humming softly in the background. Everything was meticulously maintained, as if the room was waiting for James Blackwell to wake up at any moment. But at the center of it all, lying in a bed draped with pristine white sheets, was the man himself. James Blackwell, once a titan of industry, a man who had built an empire from nothing, now appeared small, fragile. His face was pale, his hands motionless at his sides. Tubes and wires connected him to the machines that kept him alive, the rhythmic beeping serving as a constant reminder of his tenuous grasp on life. Liam stepped closer, feeling an unexpected wave of emotion. He had seen many patients in critical condition before, but something about this man, about the contrast between the powerful figure he had once been and the vulnerable state he was now in, made Liam's heart clench. "He's been like this for 3 months, Ivy said quietly. "The doctors say there's no brain activity. No hope." She crossed her arms, her voice suddenly thick with emotion she was trying desperately to suppress. "But we're not giving up." Liam turned to her, surprised by the shift in her tone. For all her coldness, there was love there, buried beneath layers of grief and control. "I'll take care of him," Liam promised. Ivy met his gaze, nodding slightly before stepping out of the room, leaving Liam alone with James and the steady hum of the machines. Taking a deep breath, Liam pulled up a chair beside the bed, his mind replaying Ivy's warning. No mistakes. No false hope. But as he looked down at James Blackwell, something in his gut told him that this was no ordinary case. And somehow, against all logic, he had the strangest feeling that the man lying before him could hear every word he was saying. The routine of caring for James Blackwell quickly became second nature to Liam Foster. Every morning, he checked the billionaire's vitals, monitored the beeping machines, and carefully adjusted the 4 fluids. The ventilator hummed in the background, its rhythmic sound a constant reminder of the fragile thread keeping James alive. Liam had seen coma patients before, but there was something unsettling about this case. James was not just another man, he was a legend, a powerhouse who had built an empire from nothing. Now, he was a prisoner in his own body, trapped in a state where doctors claimed there was no hope. But Liam wasn't convinced. He wasn't the type to ignore his instincts, and something about James's presence, his very existence in that bed, felt different. One evening, as Liam settled into his usual routine of checking the machines, he decided to do something he hadn't done before. He spoke to James. "Mr. Blackwell," he said softly, adjusting the sheets around the older man's frail body. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I believe that you can. I believe that somewhere in there, you're still fighting." Silence. Liam exhaled, shaking his head. He knew it was foolish to expect a response. The medical reports were clear. James Blackwell had been in a vegetative state for 3 months. No voluntary movement. No brain activity beyond the basic functions required to sustain life. And yet, just as Liam was about to turn away, something happened. A twitch. It was so faint that, at first, he thought he had imagined it. But as he looked down at James's right hand, his breath caught in his throat. The fingers, which had been still for months, moved. It wasn't a reflexive jerk. It wasn't an involuntary spasm. It was controlled. Deliberate. A response. Liam's heart pounded in his chest. "Mr. Blackwell," he whispered, leaning in closer. "If you can hear me, try to move your fingers again." For a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Liam was about to convince himself that it had been a mistake, his imagination running wild after a long shift, when it happened again. A slow, unmistakable movement. Liam's hands trembled as he reached for the call button. He had to tell someone. This was it, proof that James Blackwell was still there. That he wasn't gone. But then, hesitation gripped him. What if I'm wrong? What if it was just a coincidence? The weight of Ivy Blackwell's words echoed in his mind. No false hope. No mistakes. If he reported this and it turned out to be nothing, he could lose everything: the job, the paycheck that was keeping his mother's treatment going, the chance to help someone who truly needed him. Liam swallowed hard, pressing his fingers to his temple. Think, Liam. He needed to be sure. Taking a deep breath, he placed his hand gently over James's, feeling the cool skin beneath his fingertips. "Mr. Blackwell," he said again, this time more firmly. "If you can understand me, squeeze my hand." Silence. Liam's heart pounded against his ribs. He was about to pull away, about to dismiss it as nothing more than wishful thinking, when suddenly, like a bolt of lightning, James's fingers closed around his wrist. It wasn't weak. It wasn't sluggish. It was strong. Too strong. The grip was desperate, almost frantic, as if James was holding on for dear life. Liam gasped, instinctively trying to pull away, but James wouldn't let go. The older man's eyes, which had remained lifeless for months, snapped open. Wide. Alert. Desperate. Liam froze. His entire body locked in place as he stared into the piercing gaze of the man who, just moments ago, had been nothing more than a silent presence in a hospital bed. James's eyes darted around the room before settling on Liam. The billionaire's expression was not one of confusion or disorientation. It was terror. A chill ran down Liam's spine. What was he afraid of? "Mr. Blackwell?" Liam's voice was barely above a whisper. "Can you speak?" James's lips parted, but no sound came out. His throat worked, his body straining against the tubes and wires keeping him alive. His fingers dug into Liam's wrist with a strength that didn't make sense for a man who had been bedridden for so long. Liam had no idea what to do. His training had prepared him for medical emergencies, for monitoring vitals, for handling difficult patients, but this was something else entirely. Then, as suddenly as it had started, James's grip loosened. His fingers uncurled, his body relaxed, and his eyes fluttered shut once more. The machines continued their steady rhythm, unchanged. The monitors displayed no anomalies. It was as if nothing had happened at all. Liam stumbled backward, gripping the edge of the bedside table to steady himself. He had two choices. He could stay silent, pretend he hadn't seen what he had just seen, and continue on as if James Blackwell was just another coma patient with no hope of recovery. Or he could take a risk. A risk that could cost him his job. A risk that could mean everything for James Blackwell. Liam took a shaky breath, glancing at the door. He knew what he had to do. Without wasting another second, he turned and rushed out of the room. He had to find Ivy. And he had to do it now. Liam Foster barely registered the luxurious surroundings as he hurried down the long marble hallway of the Blackwell penthouse. His heart pounded in his chest, his pulse drumming in his ears. He had just witnessed the impossible. James Blackwell, a man declared to be in a permanent vegetative state, had not only moved but had gripped Liam's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes had opened, filled with something raw and desperate, as if he were trying to communicate, to break free from the silent prison his body had become. Liam's gut told him one thing: James Blackwell was still there. But convincing Ivy Blackwell? That would be another battle entirely. Reaching her office door, Liam hesitated for just a second before knocking firmly. "Come in," Ivy's clipped voice called from the other side. Liam entered, finding her seated behind a massive oak desk, piles of documents neatly stacked around her. The view behind her, New York City spread out in glittering lights, only emphasized the cold, calculated presence of the woman in front of him. She barely looked up. "What is it, Mr. Foster?" she asked, her voice laced with impatience. "I thought we agreed you would only report to me if something significant happened." Liam swallowed hard, steeling himself. "Mrs. Blackwell, something has happened. I need to speak with you, now." At his urgent tone, Ivy's eyes finally lifted from the documents. She studied him, her expression unreadable. "Go on," she said. Liam took a deep breath. "Your father," he moved. A long silence stretched between them. Ivy exhaled through her nose, closing the file in front of her with deliberate slowness. "What do you mean?" he moved, she asked, her tone dangerously neutral. Liam leaned forward. "I was checking his vitals, and at first, it was just a twitch. I wasn't sure if it was a reflex. But then I asked him to move his fingers again, and he did." Ivy's eyes narrowed. "He grabbed my wrist," Liam continued, his voice growing stronger. "Not just a weak squeeze. He held on to me. And then, he opened his eyes." Ivy flinched, just slightly, but it was enough for Liam to see it. For the first time, her carefully maintained mask of control cracked. "He looked at me, Mrs. Blackwell," Liam pressed on. He wasn't confused. He wasn't unconscious. He was aware. And I don't think he was just reacting at random, he looked afraid. Ivy's expression hardened again as she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're a new nurse, Mr. Foster. Perhaps you don't realize how common it is for coma patients to have involuntary muscle spasms. Even patients in a vegetative state can appear to move." Liam shook his head firmly. "This wasn't a reflex, Mrs. Blackwell. I've seen reflexes before. This was different." Ivy exhaled sharply, rubbing her temple. "Do you have any proof? Did the monitors pick up any changes? Any documentation?" Liam clenched his jaw. "No," he admitted, hating how weak that sounded. "The monitors didn't register anything out of the ordinary. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. You need to see him for yourself." Ivy stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She walked to the window, looking out over the city as though searching for an answer. "My father has been like this for 3 months, she said, her voice softer now, yet edged with exhaustion. "We've had every specialist, every test. Nothing has changed. The best neurologists in the country told us there is no hope." She turned back to Liam, her blue eyes sharp. "Do you know what it's like to hear that over and over again, Mr. Foster? Do you know how cruel it is to be given hope only to have it ripped away?" Liam's throat tightened. He did know. "My mother has cancer," he said quietly. "I know what it's like to hold on to hope when doctors say there's nothing left to do." For a moment, Ivy's expression softened. But it was fleeting. She quickly straightened, regaining her steel composure. "I can't afford to chase illusions, Mr. Foster," she said. "I won't put my family through that." Liam exhaled, his hands curling into fists. "I understand that," he said. "But what if this isn't an illusion? What if, for the first time in months, your father is trying to reach you, and you're not listening?" Another silence. Ivy stared at him, her jaw tight. Then, with a sharp exhale, she grabbed her blazer from the back of her chair and strode toward the door. "Fine," she said, her voice clipped. "But if I see nothing, if this is just another false hope, then we're done, Mr. Foster." Liam nodded, his heart pounding with both relief and dread. This was his one chance. As they walked back toward James's room, Liam silently prayed. "Please, Mr. Blackwell. Prove to her that you're still here. Because if Ivy didn't believe him now, she never would. Liam Foster followed Ivy Blackwell down the long corridor, his palms damp with nervous sweat. The weight of what was about to happen pressed down on him like a heavy stone. If James Blackwell didn't show any signs of awareness, Ivy would dismiss him as another naive nurse chasing a miracle. Worse, she might fire him on the spot. As they neared the door, Liam stole a glance at Ivy. Her expression was unreadable, her blue eyes cold, her jaw tight. She had agreed to this only because she wanted to put an end to what she likely saw as nonsense. But Liam knew what he had seen. He slowed his steps, taking a deep breath. "Please, Mr. Blackwell. Give us something. Anything." Ivy pushed open the door with a practiced motion, stepping into the dimly lit room. The steady beeping of machines filled the air. James Blackwell lay motionless, just as he had for months, his pale face barely distinguishable from the crisp white sheets around him. Nothing had changed. Ivy let out a quiet sigh, one of resignation. "Mr. Foster, do you see why I don't entertain hope?" she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam swallowed hard. No, I won't let this end like this." He stepped closer to the bed, his heart hammering. "Mr. Blackwell," he said gently, his voice calm but firm. "If you can hear me, please, move your fingers. Blink. Anything." Silence. Liam felt the weight of Ivy's skeptical gaze burning into the side of his face. "Come on. Please." Then, just as Liam was about to break under the tension, it happened. A single, weak twitch. Barely noticeable, but it was there. Liam's breath caught. "Mrs. Blackwell, look at his hand." Ivy frowned, stepping closer. That could be a reflex. Liam knew she would say that. He needed more. Something undeniable. He exhaled, then slowly reached for James's hand. He wrapped his fingers around it, squeezing gently. "Mr. Blackwell, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." For a moment, nothing happened. The machines beeped steadily. The ventilator hummed. Then, James squeezed back. Not a reflex. Not an involuntary muscle twitch. It was weak but deliberate. Ivy gasped. Liam turned to her, his pulse racing. "That's not a reflex. That's him." Ivy's face paled. "Dad," she whispered, stepping forward. Can you hear me?" James's fingers twitched again. It was small, but it was real. A lump formed in Liam's throat as Ivy clasped her father's hand with both of hers. Her breath hitched, emotion cracking through her carefully controlled exterior. "Dad, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand," she pleaded. Liam watched as James squeezed again, slightly stronger this time. A sound escaped Ivy, a choked sob, a mix of disbelief and relief. She turned to Liam, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I don't understand," she murmured. They said there was no chance." Liam's voice was gentle but steady. "They were wrong." Before Ivy could respond, the room filled with an unfamiliar sound. A low, raspy groan. Both Liam and Ivy froze. James Blackwell, silent for months, had just made a sound. Liam turned back to the bed, his pulse skyrocketing. "Mr. Blackwell," he called softly. Another weak groan, painful, strained, but unmistakably human. Ivy clapped a hand over her mouth. Her father was trying to speak. Liam sprang into action. "He needs water," he said, grabbing a cup and straw from the bedside table. With careful hands, he brought the straw to James's lips, tilting it slightly. To Ivy's shock, James's lips moved, his throat working as he swallowed a tiny sip of water. "Good," Liam encouraged. "Take your time, sir." Ivy's eyes darted between Liam and her father, her breath coming in shallow bursts. How is this happening?" she asked, her voice breaking. Liam wiped his damp palms on his uniform. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we need to call Dr. Holloway, now." Ivy didn't hesitate. She rushed to the phone on the wall, her hands shaking as she dialed the number. As she spoke hurriedly to the doctor, Liam turned back to James. His eyes, though still tired and heavy, were open. More than that, they were focused. A surge of emotion flooded Liam. He had trusted his instincts, fought for this moment, and now, here it was. James Blackwell was awake. And nothing would ever be the same again. The tension in the room was palpable as James Blackwell lay in his bed, eyes open for the first time in months. His breathing was labored, his body frail, but his gaze was steady, shifting between Liam Foster and Ivy Blackwell. His once powerful voice had been reduced to a whisper of effort, but it didn't matter. He was awake. Liam stood frozen, his heart hammering. He had hoped for this moment, fought for it, but now that it was happening, he felt overwhelmed. Ivy, standing beside her father, was visibly shaking. Her face, usually a mask of control, was streaked with silent tears. "Dad?" Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. James blinked, his lips parting as if to speak. Ivy reached for his hand, gripping it tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, he would slip away again. "Dad, can you hear me?" James's fingers twitched in response, his gaze locking onto hers. Then, with incredible effort, he let out a sound, rough, dry, almost inaudible. "Wait." The single word sent a jolt through the room. Ivy gasped, her grip on his hand tightening. Liam felt the air shift, like the world itself had paused to witness this impossible moment. James Blackwell had spoken. Liam sprang into action. "We need to keep him hydrated," he said, grabbing a cup of water and a small sponge from the bedside table. He gently pressed the damp sponge to James's lips, allowing a few drops of water to moisten his parched throat. James swallowed weakly. It was a small victory, but to everyone in the room, it felt monumental. A knock at the door interrupted the stunned silence. Dr. Holloway entered, his coat slightly disheveled, his face a mixture of professional skepticism and cautious optimism. "I got the call," he said, approaching the bed quickly. "What's going on?" Ivy turned to him, her voice shaking. He spoke." Dr. Holloway's eyebrows shot up. "Spoke?" He leaned in, flashing a small light into James's eyes. "Mr. Blackwell, can you understand me?" James blinked slowly, once, then twice. Liam felt a lump rise in his throat. That wasn't random. That was intentional. Dr. Holloway continued his examination, checking James's motor responses, his pulse, his pupil reactions. The room was silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor and the doctor's quiet murmurs of assessment. Finally, he stepped back, exhaling sharply. "I don't know how to explain this," he admitted, shaking his head. "This level of recovery, after 3 months in a vegetative state, it defies logic." Liam crossed his arms. "Maybe not logic," he said, "but it proves what I've been saying all along. James Blackwell was never completely gone." Ivy looked at Liam, emotion flickering across her face, conflict, disbelief, hope. Then she turned back to her father, kneeling beside his bed. "Dad," she whispered, "we thought we lost you." James's lips moved again. It was an effort, but the words came. "Not lost. A strangled sob escaped Ivy as she buried her face in his hand, clutching it to her chest. Garrett Blackwell, James's estranged son, rushed in moments later, his face pale with shock. He had been called in an emergency but hadn't expected this. His eyes darted from Ivy to Liam to Dr. Holloway before finally landing on his father. "Dad?" James turned his head slowly, locking eyes with his son. The weight of years hung in the air between them, years of distance, misunderstandings, words left unsaid. Garrett took a shaky step forward. "I thought I'd never get to talk to you again." James's lips parted. His voice was weak, but his words were unmistakable. "I'm still here. The dam broke." Garrett fell to his knees beside Ivy, taking his father's other hand. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "I'm so sorry. I should have been here." James's fingers curled around his son's. No anger. No blame. Just understanding. Liam stepped back, watching the family reunite. He had fought for this moment, but now it belonged to them. Dr. Holloway let out a long breath. "We have a lot of work ahead," he said. "This is just the beginning of a long recovery process. But make no mistake, this is a miracle." Ivy wiped her tears, nodding firmly. "Then we'll do whatever it takes." Liam met her gaze. Gone was the woman who had doubted him, who had been so determined to let go. In her place was a daughter who had just been given the impossible, a second chance. James Blackwell had come back. And nothing would ever be the same again. The days following James Blackwell's miraculous awakening were a whirlwind of emotions, medical evaluations, and cautious optimism. His body was weak, his voice barely above a whisper, but the most important thing was undeniable: he was alive, aware, and fighting to come back. Liam Foster remained by his side, guiding him through the first crucial steps of recovery. Each morning, James was assisted into a more upright position, his muscles, unused for months, trembling with effort. His hands, once motionless, now twitched as he tried to regain control. His words were slow and labored, but they came. Each syllable was a victory. Each blink of recognition, a miracle. For Ivy and Garrett Blackwell, the emotional impact of their father's return was profound. They had spent months preparing for the worst, bracing for a painful goodbye that never came. Now, they were learning to adjust, to hope again. But with that hope came the difficult realization that their father's recovery would not be immediate. "Mr. Blackwell, let's try lifting your hand today," Liam said one afternoon, kneeling beside the hospital bed that still occupied the center of James's lavish penthouse bedroom. James's gaze met Liam's, his determination clear. He gritted his teeth, summoning every ounce of strength he had. His fingers twitched first, then his wrist shifted. Slowly, painfully, his hand lifted an inch off the sheets before dropping back down. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ivy let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Garrett, standing beside her, whispered, "You got this, Dad." James exhaled heavily, exhaustion evident, but a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Liam grinned. "That's the most movement we've seen yet. You're getting stronger." James's voice, though barely audible, rasped out, "Not fast enough." Garrett chuckled. "Sounds like Dad, all right." Even Ivy, who had spent weeks locked in cold pragmatism, allowed herself a small smile. James was still James. While James's body was healing, so was something else, the fractured relationship between his children. Liam had observed the unspoken tension between Ivy and Garrett from the moment he arrived. Their interactions were polite but distant, their words careful, as if they were strangers forced into the same space. But James's return had shifted something between them. Late one evening, as Liam finished organizing James's medication schedule, he overheard Ivy and Garrett speaking softly near the window. "You were ready to let him go," Garrett murmured. There was no anger in his voice, just sadness. Ivy sighed, rubbing her temples. "I was trying to do what I thought was best. The doctors, they all said it was hopeless." Garrett shook his head. "I never gave up on him." Ivy's lips pressed together. "I know. And maybe I was too afraid to hope." She hesitated before adding, "I'm sorry, Garrett." Garrett looked at her for a long moment before nodding. "Me too." Liam turned away, giving them privacy. The walls that had once divided them were beginning to crack. And James had given them that. It was a week later, during one of James's physical therapy sessions, that he finally found the strength to say something meaningful, something that stopped everyone in their tracks. Liam, as usual, was guiding James through small exercises, wiggling his toes, squeezing a stress ball to strengthen his grip, shifting his legs slightly. James, tired but focused, suddenly lifted his gaze to his children. His voice, though weak, was clear. "No more fighting." Ivy and Garrett both froze. James took a slow, deep breath. "You two, work together. Family." Liam stepped back, letting the weight of those words settle. Garrett cleared his throat. "We're trying, Dad." James's lips twitched, almost a smile. "Good." Ivy swallowed hard, blinking away sudden tears. "We won't let you down." For the first time in years, they weren't just business partners. They weren't just the children of a powerful billionaire. They were family. As James continued to improve, Liam found himself reflecting on everything that had happened. He had arrived at the Blackwell estate as nothing more than a nurse in desperate need of a paycheck. He had expected a routine job, nothing more. But he had been wrong. This experience had changed him. It had shown him the power of persistence, of believing when no one else would. It had taught him that sometimes, the greatest battles weren't fought in operating rooms or emergency situations. They were fought in quiet hospital rooms, in moments of doubt, in the act of not giving up. And more than anything, it had given him purpose. One evening, as Liam sat beside James's bed, he quietly confessed, "I almost didn't fight for you. I almost didn't tell Ivy what I saw. I was afraid I'd be wrong." James, his voice stronger than before, met Liam's gaze. "But you did." Liam smiled. "Yeah, I did." James nodded, his expression filled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you." Liam shook his head. "No, sir. Thank you." Because James Blackwell's story wasn't just about his miraculous recovery. It was about second chances. And sometimes, all it took was one person willing to believe. James Blackwell's story is more than a medical miracle. It's a testament to the power of hope, perseverance, and human connection. In life, we often face situations where we're told there is no way forward, that all efforts are in vain. But this story reminds us that sometimes, the impossible becomes possible when we refuse to give up. For many older adults, aging can bring its own battles, health challenges, the loss of loved ones, and moments of isolation. But just like James, we are never truly alone. The love of family, the dedication of caregivers, and the strength we carry within ourselves can lead to new beginnings, even when we least expect them. Liam's unwavering belief in James teaches us that small actions matter. A kind word, a gentle touch, or the decision to stand by someone when others have lost faith can change everything. So, no matter where you are in life, remember, there is always hope. You are valued, you are seen, and your story is still being written. Keep fighting, keep believing, because sometimes, the greatest miracles happen when we simply refuse to give up.